I never thought I would hear those words from my own son. "We are going tomorrow, Mom. I have sold your beach house." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. That house was not just a building by the sea. It was where my husband proposed, where Daniel took his first steps, where every laugh and tear of our family was born. And yet, in one sentence, my son erased it all. But what he did not know was, the beach house held a secret, one that would change everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the mother he thought he knew. Before I continue, please take a moment to subscribe to Grandma Fables and stay with me until the end. This story changed my life forever. And maybe it will change the way you see love, family, and forgiveness too. My name is Margaret Emelson, and I am 68 years old. I live in a quiet coastal town in Maine, where the mornings smell of salt and pine, and the evenings carry the soft hum of waves against the shore. For most of my life, I believed I was a woman who had everything one could ask for: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a son who was the very heartbeat of my existence. I grew up in a modest household, the daughter of a fisherman and a school teacher. We never had much, but my parents taught me that love and honesty were riches far greater than gold. My father would leave before dawn, his boots heavy with seawater, and my mother would stay up waiting for him, lamp flickering by the window. Watching them taught me that devotion was not loud, it was quiet. It lived in the small acts: a packed lunch, a mended shirt, a soft word after a long day. When I met Richard Emelson, I was only 22. He had the kind of smile that made you feel safe, the kind that carried warmth even in silence. He was a carpenter then, building small wooden boats by hand. I fell in love not just with him, but with the life he imagined for us. Simple, honest, and filled with purpose. We married under an old oak tree near the beach. The ceremony was small, just a few friends and family, but it was perfect. The ocean roared behind us like a witness, and I remember thinking that if happiness had a sound, it would be the sea that day. After our wedding, we worked side by side. Richard opened a small company that built handcrafted furniture. It started in our garage with only a few tools, but through sheer determination, it grew. I handled the accounts and customers, while he handled the designs. We never hired many people because he believed in quality, not quantity. Each piece he made carried his spirit, honest, strong, and built to last. When our son Daniel was born, I felt as if the world had finally completed itself. He had Richard's eyes, steady and full of wonder. We brought him home from the hospital to our beach house, the one Richard had built with his own hands long before we married. It stood on a quiet stretch of coastline, white shutters, blue roof, and a porch that faced the endless horizon. It was not large or grand, but it was filled with laughter, warmth, and the smell of freshly baked bread. That house saw everything. Daniel's first steps on the porch, his first scraped knee, his first day of school when he clung to my skirt and begged not to go. I can still hear his laughter echoing through those wooden halls, mingling with the sound of the waves outside. Richard and I raised him with love and discipline. We taught him to be humble, to work hard, to respect others. We wanted him to grow up knowing that character mattered more than money, that kindness was the measure of a person. Life was not always easy. There were years when the business struggled, when bills piled up, and we questioned if we could keep the house. But we endured. I remember staying up late at the kitchen table, counting coins and whispering prayers. Richard would place his hand over mine and say, "We have each other, Maggie. That is enough." And somehow, it always was. Then 10 years ago, my world shifted. Richard fell ill. At first, it was only fatigue. He said he was fine, that it was just the long days in the workshop. But soon, the doctor spoke words I could barely understand. Heart condition, surgery, risks. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I watched the man I had loved for 40 years fade, not in spirit but in strength. He never complained. Even in pain, he smiled. He would squeeze my hand and say, "Do not cry, Maggie. I built our home strong enough for you to stand in it alone." The day he passed, the sea was unusually calm. The sky was painted with gold and rose, as if the heavens themselves were sending him off gently. I sat on the porch after the funeral, holding his old work gloves, and I promised him I would keep everything we built alive. After Richard's passing, I managed the company myself. It was not easy, but I did it for him and for Daniel. I wanted our son to have a future, to inherit something solid, something that carried his father's legacy. Daniel was my pride and my purpose. He was bright, ambitious, and full of dreams. I made sure he never lacked anything. When he wanted to study business, I paid for his college. When he wanted his own car, I sold some of our old furniture pieces to afford it. When he struggled, I reminded him that failure was not the end, but a lesson. I gave him everything: time, love, support, money, sometimes even at the cost of my own peace. I often went to bed exhausted, my hands aching from paperwork and my heart heavy with worry. But every morning I told myself it was worth it. That is what mothers do. We give. The beach house became a place of comfort for me after Richard's death. I would sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the waves. Sometimes I would talk to him, quietly, as if he were still there beside me. I kept his workshop untouched. His tools still hung on the wall, his unfinished boat still rested in the corner. It made me feel as though he had never really left. As the years passed, Daniel became my only reason to smile. When he would visit, the house would come alive again. His laughter would echo through the halls, and I would cook his favorite meal: roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, just like when he was a boy. He used to tell me, "Mom, one day I will make you proud. I will take care of you the way you took care of me." Those words stayed in my heart. They were my comfort on lonely nights, my hope when the silence grew too loud. But time changes people in ways we do not always see. It started subtly. Daniel began visiting less. His calls grew shorter, his messages colder. He was busy, he said. Life had become demanding. I told myself it was normal. Children grow, build their own lives, and drift away a little. But deep down, a small ache began to form, one that whispered that something was shifting between us. Still, I refused to believe it. I told myself he was just focused on his career, that he would come around once things settled, because that is what mothers do. We believe in our children even when the world gives us reasons not to. If someone had told me then that my own son would one day betray me, that he would look into my eyes and sell the last piece of my heart for money, I would have laughed. But life has a way of humbling even the most faithful hearts. And sometimes the people you raise to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. It happened, as most life-changing moments do, on an ordinary day that began without warning. The sea was calm, the morning air cool and scented with salt. I was hanging freshly washed sheets on the line behind the house, humming one of Richard's old tunes, when I heard the familiar rumble of Daniel's car coming up the gravel driveway. It had been weeks since his last visit. I felt that old rush of joy that mothers know so well, the kind that makes your heart race and your hands forget what they are doing. I hurried to the porch, still holding a wooden clothespin between my fingers. He stepped out of the car, taller and more confident than before, his eyes bright with a kind of excitement I had not seen in a long time. But it was not his presence alone that made my breath catch. A young woman climbed out from the passenger side, her hair dancing lightly in the sea breeze. She wore a soft blue dress and carried herself with the quiet assurance of someone who had already been welcomed into someone's dreams. "Mom," Daniel said, smiling, "this is Emily Parker." She reached out her hand, her smile gentle and practiced. "It is so lovely to finally meet you, Mrs. Emelson. Daniel has told me so much about you." Her tone was warm, her manners flawless. I took her hand and felt its coolness against mine. "Please, call me Margaret, dear. Come in, both of you. The kettle is already on." That afternoon became the beginning of a new chapter in our lives. Emily spoke easily, her words graceful, and her laughter frequent. She asked about Richard, about the business, and about the beach house itself. I noticed how she looked around the room, her eyes taking in every photograph, every polished frame, every memory displayed on the walls. She was charming, attentive, and polite, everything a mother could hope for her son to find. Over the weeks that followed, she visited often, sometimes with Daniel, sometimes alone. She would bring flowers from the market or a box of pastries, insisting she wanted to help me with chores. She admired my garden, complimented the house, and told me she wished she had grown up somewhere like this. "Everything here feels so alive," she said once, standing by the window that overlooked the ocean. It must be wonderful to wake up to this view every day. It has been my comfort, I replied quietly. This house carries our history. My husband built it with his own hands. She smiled and nodded, though her gaze lingered on the horizon longer than seemed necessary. Daniel adored her. I saw it in the way his voice softened when he said her name, the way his eyes followed her when she spoke. He told me that she worked in marketing, that she was ambitious and independent, that she had big plans for her future. I liked that about her, or at least I wanted to. When Daniel finally told me they were thinking of moving in together, my heart twisted with both pride and sorrow. He was growing up, building his own life, as he should. I helped them pack. I gave them the extra dining set from the storage room and wrote a small check to help with their rent. You have done more than enough, Mom, Daniel said, though he took the check without protest. Nonsense, I replied. A mother's joy is to see her child happy. Use it wisely. Their apartment was modest, near the city. I visited once, bringing a pie. The place smelled faintly of paint and new beginnings. Emily showed me around, explaining how she planned to decorate. Daniel stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, smiling proudly. For a moment, I believed that everything was exactly as it should be. But love, I have learned, can sometimes blind us to what the eyes try to show. In the beginning, the distance was small, barely noticeable. A missed phone call, a postponed visit, a text that went unanswered for days. Daniel had always been close to me, calling every evening just to ask how I was doing. But soon, those calls came less frequently, until they stopped altogether. I told myself it was normal. He was busy, he was young, he had a life of his own now. Still, the silence hurt. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday morning when the phone rang. I recognized Emily's voice instantly. She sounded cheerful, her words rushed, as if she were in a hurry to deliver exciting news. Mrs. Emelson, she said brightly, I just wanted to let you know that Daniel and I got married yesterday. I stood frozen. Married? I whispered. Yes, she replied, laughing softly. It was just a small ceremony at the courthouse. Very simple, very private. We only invited important people. Her words struck like cold water. Important people. I see, I said after a pause that seemed to last forever. Well, congratulations to both of you. Thank you, she said quickly, as if eager to end the call. We will visit soon. But they did not. I hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea that had gone cold. Outside, the sea moved gently as if mocking my stillness. I remembered the promise Daniel made as a boy, that when he married, I would bake the cake, and he would dance with me by the shore. He had even said he wanted to wear his father's cufflinks, and now all of it had happened without me. That night, I could not sleep. I wandered through the house, the sound of the waves pressing softly against the walls. I looked at the wedding photographs on the mantel, mine and Richard A.S., and wondered what he would have said. He would have comforted me. He always did. He would have told me not to take it personally, that love makes people foolish sometimes. But even he would have been hurt. The following weeks passed in slow, heavy silence. When Daniel finally called, he spoke as though nothing had happened. Mom, we just wanted something simple, he said. You know how expensive weddings are. I wanted to ask why he had not told me sooner, but the words stuck in my throat. I could not bear to sound bitter, so I simply said, I hope she makes you very happy. She does, he replied quickly. We are planning our future now. Big things ahead. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that the son I raised was still the boy who once held my hand at the shore and promised he would never leave me alone. But something inside me had begun to shift. As the months went by, Emily's influence over him became clearer. He stopped asking for advice, stopped sharing details about his work. When I did see them, Emily spoke for him more often than not. She mentioned new business ideas, investments, and opportunities that sounded far too ambitious for someone with no real experience. You should think about selling the company, Mrs. Emelson, she said one afternoon as we sat on the porch. You have worked your whole life. You deserve rest. Let Daniel take over. He has such vision. I smiled politely, though her words stung. This company is the last piece of Richard I have left, I said gently. It is not only business, dear. It is memory. It is love turned into something that lasts. She gave a sympathetic smile that did not reach her eyes. Of course. I only meant that it might help the family move forward. Something in her tone made me uneasy, but I stayed silent. Weeks later, Daniel came to visit alone. He looked tired, distracted, and older somehow. Mom, he said, avoiding my gaze. Emily and I have been struggling a bit, just a temporary setback. Could you lend us some money? I will pay you back soon. Without hesitation, I agreed. Of course, dear. How much do you need? He mentioned a figure that made my breath hitch, but I reminded myself that this was my son, my only son. I transferred the amount that same day. The following month, he asked again, then again. Each time, the explanation changed slightly. Business investments, rent, unexpected expenses. Each time, my heart said yes, even when my mind whispered that something was wrong. One evening, I went to their apartment unannounced. I wanted to see for myself that everything was all right. Emily opened the door. Her expression flickered when she saw me. Oh, Mrs. Emelson, how lovely to see you. You should have called. I was nearby, I said softly, stepping inside. I thought I would surprise you. The place was beautifully decorated now. Expensive furniture, designer curtains, a new sound system. It did not look like the home of two people struggling financially. Daniel appeared from the bedroom, startled. Mom, what are you doing here? I wanted to see you, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It has been so long. He looked uncomfortable, glancing at Emily. We have been busy. Things have been hectic. I nodded. I understand. I brought dinner. We ate in awkward silence. I tried to ask about his work, about their plans, but the answers were vague. Emily kept changing the subject, smiling too brightly, laughing too often. When I left that night, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Something was slipping through my fingers, something I could not name but could feel deep in my bones. From that point on, our relationship grew more distant. I began to hear things through neighbors and mutual friends, rumors of arguments, of financial troubles, of Emily spending more than they could afford. Each time I asked, Daniel denied it. Everything is fine, Mom. Please do not worry. But worry was all I had left. Then came the final blow. One quiet morning, I sat on the porch reading the newspaper when Daniel's car pulled up once again. My heart lifted, though I noticed his expression was tense. Emily sat beside him, her face unreadable. They walked up to the porch, and before I could greet them, Daniel spoke. Mom, he said, his tone careful. Emily and I have been talking. We have decided it is time to make some changes. We think it would be best to sell the beach house. For a moment, the world went silent. The sea, the wind, even the gulls above seemed to pause. Sell the beach house? I repeated slowly. But why? It is too much for you to maintain, Emily said smoothly. You live alone, and the property taxes are high. It would be better to sell it and move somewhere smaller. Daniel could handle everything. I looked at my son, waiting for him to correct her, to reassure me that this was just an idea, not a decision. But he stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes downcast. Mom, it is for the best, he said quietly. You will be happier somewhere simpler. We can take care of the details. The sound of those words broke something inside me. That night, I sat alone on the porch long after they left. The sea was dark, the horizon endless. I thought about every nail Richard had hammered into the walls of that house, every story those rooms held, every lullaby I had sung to Daniel when storms raged outside. And now, all of it, our history, our love, our legacy, was being reduced to a transaction. Still, I tried to believe that perhaps they were only misguided, that love would bring my son back to me. But deep down, I knew the tide was already changing. Love had begun to turn into greed, and my heart, once full of trust, was beginning to tremble with fear. It began with silence. The kind of silence that fills a house when laughter has long faded, when the walls remember what you wish to forget. After Daniel and Emily married without telling me, the days passed like a slow ache. They stopped calling, stopped visiting, and even when they did, their presence felt distant, rehearsed, polite, hollow. I told myself it was temporary, that every young couple needed space. But a mother's heart knows when something sacred has broken. One cold morning in early November, I decided that enough was enough. I had spent months paying their rent, covering their utilities, and pretending that all was well. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once taught Daniel his times tables, and wrote him a letter. I told him that I would no longer cover their bills. I wrote it with kindness, explaining that they needed to learn to stand on their own feet, that love and responsibility must walk hand in hand. I even slipped in a check to help them through the next month. I thought it would be received with gratitude, or at least understanding. 2 weeks later, a heavy envelope arrived by courier. It bore the seal of the local court. I thought it was some mistake, perhaps something to do with the company or taxes. But as I unfolded the papers, my hands began to tremble. The document stated that my son, my Daniel, had filed a petition declaring me mentally unfit to manage my late husband's company and estate. The words blurred before my eyes. My knees gave way, and I sank into the nearest chair. The letterhead looked official, the lawyer's name unfamiliar. But what tore through me was not the legal jargon. It was the signature at the bottom. His name. My son's handwriting. For a long while, I simply sat there, listening to the clock tick above the stove. Each second felt like a hammer driving into my chest. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake nursing his fevers, the sacrifices, the loneliness, the years of love poured out like rain, all reduced to a few lines on a legal form. The petition claimed that I was unstable, that I had shown signs of confusion, that I was making irrational financial decisions. He argued that I was endangering the company, and that control should be transferred to him, my only child, who now saw me as an obstacle. I could almost hear Emily's voice behind those words, cleverly phrased, legally precise, cold as winter stone. That night, I could not sleep. I walked through the empty house, my footsteps echoing softly on the wooden floors. Every corner whispered memories. The photos on the mantel, the clock Richard had repaired, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering on the coat he left behind. I felt him there somehow, watching, silent. "Richard," I whispered into the darkness. "What happened to our boy?" No answer came, only the soft crash of waves against the shore outside. The sea had always comforted me. But that night, even its song felt sorrowful. The next morning, I met with a lawyer, an old family friend named Mr. Carlson. He had known my husband for years, had dined at our table many times. When I told him what had happened, he removed his glasses slowly and stared at me with disbelief. "I have seen greed tear families apart," he said quietly. "But this is something else." We began gathering evidence. Every letter, every bill, every record showing my clear mind and sound judgment. Mr. Carlson assured me that truth had a way of defending itself, but I could not shake the feeling that I had already lost something far greater than property. I had lost my son. The hearings began 2 months later. I dressed carefully for that first day. A navy blue dress, a pearl necklace Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary. I wanted to walk in with dignity, not as a broken mother, but as the woman my husband had believed in, strong, calm, and proud. When I entered the courtroom, Daniel was already there. He would not meet my eyes. Emily sat beside him, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. I noticed the way she placed her hand over his, possessive, controlling, almost triumphant. The judge began reading the case summary. Words like mental instability, unfit, mismanagement echoed through the room like daggers. My heart ached, but my resolve hardened. I was not mad. I was not weak. I was a woman who had given her life for her family, and I refused to let them destroy me. My lawyer presented the evidence, bank records, company files, letters in my handwriting, testimonies from employees who had worked with me for years, all confirming that I was in perfect control of the business. The truth was clear. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, his voice trembled. "I did not want to do this, Mother," he said softly. But you have not been yourself. You forget things. You make impulsive choices. Emily and I are just trying to protect you. I wanted to shout, to remind him of all the nights I had stayed awake watching over him, of all the impulsive choices I had made for his happiness. But instead, I simply said, "If protection means betrayal, then you have done your job well." For a moment, his expression faltered, a flicker of guilt, quickly buried beneath pride. Days turned into weeks. Each hearing felt like reliving every wound. The press caught wind of the case. Wealthy widow declared unfit by her son. I avoided looking at the headlines. I focused on the truth. And then, on a quiet Friday afternoon, the judge delivered the verdict. The court finds no evidence of mental instability. Mrs. Margaret Emelson is of sound mind and shall remain the sole owner and executor of her estate. I heard a gasp from the courtroom. Perhaps from Daniel, perhaps from Emily. I did not look. My eyes filled with tears, but not of triumph. They were tears of mourning, for the son I had lost, for the love that had turned to ash. Outside the courthouse, the winter wind bit against my face. I stood on the steps, watching the gray sky dissolve into drizzle. Mr. Carlson congratulated me, but his voice felt distant. "You won," he said gently. But I did not feel victorious. I felt empty. That night I returned home and stood in front of the beach house window, watching the waves roll in under the moonlight. The sea had seen everything: the birth of my child, the laughter of my marriage, the slow decay of my peace. As I stood there, I whispered, "I forgive you, Daniel, not because you deserve it, but because I cannot carry this pain forever." The ocean answered with a soft roar, as if acknowledging my release. It was then that I realized, justice in court is one thing, but peace in the heart is something else entirely. The legal battle had ended, but the true healing had only just begun. The weeks that followed the trial passed like a quiet storm fading over the horizon. The papers on my dining table were neatly filed away, but their presence lingered like ghosts. Every time I looked at them, I felt both pain and relief, the pain of betrayal and the relief of freedom. For the first time in many years, the house felt entirely mine. The silence that once tormented me began to feel peaceful, almost kind. I would wake in the morning to the soft hum of waves and sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, and I would simply breathe. One morning, I made myself a promise. I told myself that if I could survive the breaking of my own heart, I could survive anything. So I began to rebuild. Not my business, not my reputation, but my life. The first step was small. I decided to leave the company in the hands of trusted managers who had worked beside my husband for years. They were honest men, loyal and hardworking. I told them I wished to take some time for myself. They agreed, almost relieved to see me finally think of my own well-being. Then, one crisp February morning, I packed a small suitcase. Just a few clothes, my husband's old journal, and a photo of Daniel as a child. And I left for the seaside. Not the same beach where the house stood, but a quieter one further north. I wanted no memories there. I wanted new air. The cottage I rented was modest but beautiful, a single-story home perched above a rocky shore, with wide windows that opened to the endless blue. I would sit by those windows every morning with a cup of tea, watching the tide roll in and out like the rhythm of healing. It is strange how, when you are alone long enough, your thoughts begin to speak differently. At first, they were sharp and restless. I replayed every word Daniel had said, every moment I had ignored my instincts, every kindness I had offered that was turned into a weapon. But slowly, the anger softened. I began to read again, books my husband once loved. I started journaling, something I had not done since my youth. I wrote letters to Richard, letters to my younger self, and even one to Daniel, though I never sent it. In that letter, I wrote, "My dear boy, I forgive you. I forgive the weakness that led you astray, the pride that blinded you, and the silence that followed. But I cannot let you hurt me again, so I release you, and I release myself." Each word felt like lifting a stone from my chest. In the evenings, I walked along the shoreline. The locals would nod politely, a few elderly women, fishermen, and shopkeepers. There was something healing about being unknown, about existing without a history that anyone could point to. The sea air filled my lungs, and for the first time in years, I began to sleep soundly. One Sunday morning, as I strolled through the village, I noticed a small group of women gathered outside a cafe. They looked around my age, chatting over pastries and tea. Something in their laughter felt inviting, so I smiled as I passed. One of them, a woman named Helen, waved me over. "You must be new here," she said, her voice cheerful and warm. "We meet every Sunday morning. Coffee, gossip, and the occasional debate about whose scones are best. You should join us." And so I did. That simple act, sitting among strangers, sharing stories, laughing about nothing at all, was like stepping into sunlight after years of rain. The women became my friends. They called themselves the Morning Circle, and every Sunday we met without fail. In time, I began volunteering at the local library. I helped organize reading sessions for children and hosted small storytelling afternoons. They began calling me Miss Margaret, though some affectionately called me Grandma Margaret. I found joy in those little faces, their curiosity and laughter. They reminded me that love can begin again, even after it has been broken. Months passed. Spring arrived, and with it, renewal. The cottage garden bloomed with wild daisies and lavender. The air smelled of salt and new beginnings. My heart no longer ached every morning. It felt light, peaceful. Then one afternoon, as I sat by the window writing in my journal, the phone rang. I almost ignored it, but something urged me to answer. It was Mrs. Cooper, my old neighbor from the town where the beach house stood. Her voice trembled slightly. "Margaret, dear, I thought you should know. Daniel and Emily moved away. They sold their house last month. Word is, things have been difficult for them. Emily lost her job and the business venture they started failed. I hope you are doing well, love." For a long moment, I said nothing. I stared at the sea, its waves glinting softly under the afternoon sun. I felt no triumph, no bitterness, only a deep, quiet sadness, and a strange, gentle peace. "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper," I finally said. "I am well, truly." After we hung up, I sat for a while, listening to the wind against the windows. There was something poetic about the way life balances itself, not through vengeance, but through consequence. The universe has a way of teaching lessons far better than anger ever could. That evening, I walked down to the beach. The tide was low, and the sand was cool beneath my feet. The horizon glowed with soft orange light. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for Daniel. "May you find wisdom in the ashes," I said softly, "and may you remember that love without respect is not love at all." As I turned to walk back, I felt the wind brush my face, warm and gentle, like a blessing. That night, I opened my husband's old journal. Inside the back cover, he had written a note I had somehow forgotten. "If life ever breaks you, rebuild gently. The cracks are proof that you lived." I smiled through my tears. He had always known the right words. In the months that followed, I continued to heal. My days were simple: tending to the garden, reading to children, writing letters I would never send. I had stopped waiting for apologies. I had stopped wishing for the past to change. I had learned to let time do its quiet work. And then, one golden morning, as the sun rose over the sea, I realized something extraordinary. I was happy. Not the kind of happiness that comes from excitement or success, but the kind that grows from peace, steady, calm, and deeply rooted. I no longer needed anyone to understand my pain. I no longer needed my son's validation. I had finally become my own person, not just a mother or a widow, but a woman who had survived love's most painful test and still found grace on the other side. The beach house and the one Daniel had sold no longer haunted me. In fact, I began to see it differently. Perhaps it had served its purpose. It was a chapter that had closed so a new one could begin. Now, whenever I sit by the sea, I whisper a quiet thank you. Thank you for the lessons, for the storms, for the strength I never knew I had. I have learned that peace is not found in keeping what you love, but in learning to release it when the time comes. The sea continues to sing its eternal song outside my window. The gulls fly low, the sunlight dances on the waves, and somewhere in the distance, life carries on, gentle, imperfect, but beautifully alive. I sip my tea, turn another page in my journal, and write the words that have become my truth. I did not lose my family. I found myself. And in that moment, I know I am free. When I look back now, I understand that life has a way of teaching us through heartbreak. Love, even the purest kind, can lose its shape when it is given without boundaries. I spent my years giving everything I had, time, comfort, money, and forgiveness, believing that selflessness was the highest form of love. But I have learned that love without respect is merely an illusion. A mother's heart is vast, but it must not become a place where others build their selfishness. To love your children is to guide them, not to surrender yourself entirely to their choices. There is strength in letting go, in saying, I will love you from a distance if I must. I once believed that peace would come when Daniel returned, when he apologized, when everything was made right again. But peace did not come from the outside. It grew quietly within me, like sunlight filtering through a storm. If there is one truth I hold now, it is this. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting. It means freeing your soul so it can breathe again. It means choosing peace over pride and understanding that sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away. So if my story has reached your heart, hold this close. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to begin again, no matter how late in life it feels. If my story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Grandma Fables. Every story here carries a piece of truth, and perhaps the lesson someone out there needs to hear today.